If someone was watching on the streets of Amsterdam in 1942, they would have seen a family with 3 daughters playing in the street. The youngest was named Willie. She was just 2 years old.
My name was Wilhelmina van der Zijden. I lived in a suburb of Amsterdam called Amstelveen. I remember playing with the kids on the street. I accepted the family as my mother and father, and the 2 children that they had were my sisters. And to me, it was as normal as it could be.
But things weren't normal. Things were much different than they appeared.
During that time, you must remember that Holland was an occupied country, and things for everyone were difficult.
The children who appeared to be her sisters were anything but, and the people she called Mom and Dad weren't even related to her.
I joined as the 3rd daughter when I was about 2, and I stayed there till I was 6.
But to figure out how that little girl got there, you have to go even farther back in time, before 1942, before the Nazis invaded the Netherlands during World War II. The little girl who thought her name was Wilhelmina van der Zijden didn't even know her real last name.
My name at birth was Wilhelmina de Cat, and I was a hidden child during World War II in the Netherlands. I never was taken to a concentration camp. I don't have numbers tattooed on my wrist, but nevertheless, I suffered many of the consequences of being hidden, of having my identity as a Jew hidden from the Nazis.
Wilhelmina de Cat, now Willie Julen, was a victim of the Holocaust, and though she didn't die as millions others did in the concentration camps, her life was taken in a different way. Her parents, her childhood, even her religious identity were taken from her as a hidden child of the Holocaust. Willie's parents, Sonia and Louis de Cat, had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They ran a business that bottled condensed milk. They lived a normal life in North Holland until World War II reached their doors.
Well, the war directly affected the people in the Netherlands in May of 1940 when Holland was occupied by the Nazis, which continued until the end of the war in 1945.
The Nazis forced all the Jews to go to Amsterdam so they could keep them all in one place. Willie and her family moved in with her grandparents. One day, there was a knock on the door.
The knock came on the door, and my brother was hidden from them in the bathtub where he was sleeping, and so he slept right through that. That was lucky for him that he wasn't crying or anything like that.
While her baby brother slept in the tub, the Nazis took Willie and her parents to an old theater which had been converted to a deportation center. Although at the time, the Nazis weren't interested in the elderly, like Willie's grandparents.
And I, with my parents, went along to that place, and my grandmother and grandfather went also to say goodbye.
The deportation center was chaotic. There were crowds of Jews being rounded up to be shipped off to concentration camps, and Willie's parents made a desperate decision.
It was a decision that they had to make quickly, and they did, without mulling it over too long.
And Willie's life changed in an instant.
In that confusion of a lot of people milling around in that theater, frightened, disorganized perhaps, they overlooked me. Lucky for me too. And I think when you hear a Holocaust survivor story, you will hear the word luck being used a lot. My parents were able to hand me over to my grandparents, so that my parents were deported to Westerbork, and I was taken back with my grandparents to their house in Amsterdam. I escaped deportation at that time.
But Willie's grandparents knew it wasn't safe for the children to stay in Amsterdam.
I'm sure that they were aware of what was going on in the Netherlands and that before it got better, it was going to get worse. They saw the writing on the wall and they wanted to save both my brother and me. So they found people, my hiding parents, who were willing to take me, and they also found other hiding parents for my brother, because it would have been too dangerous for one set of parents to all of a sudden have 2 extra children in their household. The people that took me in were the in-laws of the seamstress that worked in my grandmother and grandfather's household.
As difficult as it was for her grandparents to give them away, it was also hard for the families that took them in. If the Nazis found people helping Jews, they would set their houses on fire or even shoot them on the spot.
There was the constant fear also on the parts of my hiding parents of neighbors betraying us. In the Netherlands, there were 6,000 hidden children. 2,000 of them were betrayed by neighbors, by passers-by. I'm sure that they were scared for their own safety, and especially since they had their own family, their 2 daughters, to consider. But they did it because they felt the moral reason to do it, that they had to do that.
Young Willie lived life like a normal child, thinking that her hiding family was her real family, even though adding a 2-year-old could appear odd to outsiders.
They explained away my presence in their household to the neighbors by saying that I was a cousin coming to live with them. And that also became a little complicated because I was, in my youth, believe it or not, with my gray hair, I was brunette. And the typical Dutch child is blue-eyed and blonde-haired. But luckily, my hiding father, he also was brunette, so that helped make my acceptance into that family a little easier.
She tried to blend in with her hidden family, and though she was born Jewish, she was raised as a Catholic and went to church.
The challenges were to blend in, for them, I'm sure, to blend in with the other families in the neighborhood. I went to church with them and celebrated holidays with them and lived through the challenges of an occupied country, which includes air raids and blackouts and food shortages. I wasn't hidden, literally, like Anne Frank was hidden. They were hidden in the attic and they couldn't go out for about 2 years.
Occasionally, she would visit with another family who had a young son. She knew this boy as a family friend. Only later did she find out who he really was.
I didn't realize he was my brother. He was not hidden far away at all in the next town over, but I was taken over there and visited this friend.
Though her brother was close by, she had no idea what had happened to the rest of her family. She hadn't seen her parents since they were taken away, and her grandparents, who remained in Amsterdam, were eventually taken away too.
My grandparents were also deported, but not until about 1944, which was towards the end of the war. And they were taken to Bergen-Belsen, another concentration camp. My grandfather died there through illness and malnutrition. My grandmother, who was always a very strong woman, survived Bergen-Belsen until the liberation in 1945. She was very ill at the time.
When the war ended, Willie was reunited with her grandmother, who decided that she would take Willie and her brother to America.
It took her some months to recuperate from her illness, losing massive amounts of weight, until she was able to come and take us as an immigrant family to New York City.
As a child, all the details of what happened to her family had been kept from her. But after the move to America, when she was old enough to handle it, her grandmother sat her down. The truth was brutal.
It was sad, it was traumatic. That sit down that I had with my grandmother was very harder for her, I'm sure, than it was for me, as I was still quite young, and she had to relive that whole episode.
And that was when she learned of her parents' fate.
My parents were taken to Auschwitz in a train along with many, many other people. They didn't stay there very long, but they were murdered, and that's the only word I can use, is murdered, shortly after their arrival, where I'm sure their fate was what was typical in Auschwitz, where they were murdered in the gas chambers.
The things that people had to do to keep Willie from the same fate must have been hard. But sometimes the right things to do are the hardest. And as for Willie, though she has gotten older, her loss hasn't faded.
And still to this day, when people, friends of mine, talk about their mothers, I am very quiet because I have nothing to talk about.
But Willie can count herself as one of the survivors of the Holocaust, who was lucky to be with us to tell her story.
I feel it very important because these children, and now people of my generation, are getting older, and I feel it's very important to chronicle this because we won't be here that much longer. And again, we must never forget that this did happen, and to also bear in mind the quotation of Elie Wiesel, who said, "If you see a witness, you become a witness."
World War II was the deadliest war in history, killing over 50 million people around the world. Of the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust, 1 million were children. But thousands of children like Willie survived because of the people who risked everything to stand against hatred.